It was a crisp morning in the Montana forest with the air smelling of fresh pine. I was enjoying a peaceful walk when a terrified scream broke the silence. I spun around and saw a guy running for his life from a pack of wild wolves. Acting quickly, I let out a loud howl and crouched low. The wolves stopped, completely distracted, and cautiously sniffed their way over to me. The guy screamed at me to run, but I shushed him, telling him to stay quiet so he wouldn't startle them. Once the wolves realized I wasn't a threat, they wagged their tails and started licking my face. The guy was still trembling, stammering to ask if I was scared. I smiled and told him not to worry, explaining that people always misunderstand wolves, and this wasn't Little Red Riding Hood. I then invited him to come over and make some new friends. By the way, my name is Winona. I'm an 18-year-old Native American living on the Blackfeet Reservation with my mom, and I'm about to tell you the craziest story of my life. After the wolves left, I helped the guy, whose name was Luke, limp over to a quiet riverbank to wash a scratch on his leg. Luke looked at me with excitement, asking if I was a born and bred Blackfoot because it was his first time meeting a Native American. I smiled and asked what brought a city boy like him to Montana. He told me he was a pianist wandering around for inspiration. I giggled, teasingly asking if he had found it, or if he had almost lost himself to the wolves instead. Luke laughed, admitting inspiration was hard to find, especially for a theater pianist. I asked in surprise what he meant, and he explained that he worked at the Winter Garden. My eyes sparked, and I eagerly asked if he meant the one in New York. When he nodded, I couldn't stop talking, confessing that it was my dream to be a Broadway actress. Luke then told me his theater was looking for a stage crew, suggesting I could start there while he found ways to introduce me to the right people. I was thrilled, but there was a huge problem. My mom absolutely resented the theater and had strictly forbidden me from ever mentioning it. I had to devise a clever plan. I decided to bring Luke home for lunch. My mom was very welcoming and prepared a wonderful meal. As she brought the food out, she asked Luke what brought him to Montana. Luke glanced at me nervously, stammering that he was in college and doing a research paper for school. Mom sat down, noting he was around my age since I had just finished high school. Luke quickly seized the opportunity, telling her that if it wasn't for me, he would be dead, and asked if he could invite me to college with him. Mom was surprised but pleased, asking what he was studying. I quickly chimed in, claiming it was hotel management and saying I wanted to give it a try. Mom turned to me, puzzled, and reminded me that I wanted to take a gap year. I explained that I just hadn't wanted to go to college alone, but now that I had met Luke, it would be different. Luke promised her he would take great care of me. My mom smiled and nodded, and I happily realized our mission was accomplished. New York at night was absolutely crazy. The bright flashing lights of Times Square and the endless sea of shouting people made my head spin. Luckily, Luke was right there holding my hand, helping me navigate the busy streets safely. He had even managed to find me a tiny apartment just a few blocks away from the theater, which was amazing. The very next day, he got me a job as a stagehand so I could get used to the theater environment. It was tough work, especially since our director, Ms. Killorn, was incredibly grumpy and always shouting a million demands at everyone. He once even screamed at me to get out of the way, calling me the cleaning lady. But just being that close to the stage, smelling the dust and old wood under the bright lights, felt completely magical. One day, while we were preparing for a new play, Killorn lost his temper and started throwing scripts all over the floor. Out of curiosity, I picked up one of the pages and noticed a line written in my native language, Blackfoot. Without thinking, I read it out loud, translating the phrase Kitsikakumin, which meant I love you. My voice must have been too loud because Miss Killorn suddenly turned and stared at me in total shock. I felt my face turn red, completely embarrassed. He walked over and asked me with surprise how I had learned to speak the language. I explained that my mother had taught me back on the Blackfeet Reservation. He looked deeply interested, and to my absolute disbelief told me that I was cast as the lead actress for the play. He handed me his business card and told me to go meet Jade, the acting coach, at the studio for further instructions. I froze on the spot, completely unable to believe my luck, until Luke rushed over, bowed politely to the director, and gently pulled me away. As we walked out, my heart was racing, and I kept wondering if I was finally living my dream. I finally made it to the studio, but the front yard was a total mess. A crowd had gathered, and a guy was frantically waving his umbrella at a snarling animal. I realized to my disbelief that they were trying to shoo away a wild coyote. I tried to yell at everyone to back up, but my voice was completely drowned out. Fortunately, a guy standing next to me took charge and shouted loudly for everyone to get back. The crowd finally listened, giving me some space. I slowly stepped toward the trembling coyote, knelt, and offered my hand. Once he trusted me, I gently stroked his head to calm him down. Right after, Mr. Killorn's assistant rushed out to take the animal inside, explaining that he was actually the director's pet. I watched them walk away, wondering who on earth keeps a wild animal in a stuffy city. The guy who had helped me walked over, looking worriedly at my hands, and asked if I was okay. I blushed and reassured him I was fine, mentioning that the poor coyote just looked terrified. He smiled, observing that I seemed to know a lot about animals. I explained that I grew up around them, and that in Blackfoot mythology, coyotes are considered guardian spirits. He looked at me warmly, saying that I had definitely been a guardian spirit just now. His words made my heart flutter, but the moment was ruined when Luke suddenly ran up, looking panicked. Luke demanded to know if I was all right, then glared at the other guy and sharply asked what he was doing here. The guy suddenly turned cold and walked away while Luke kept glaring at his back. I smiled and told Luke I was fine, but Luke warned me very seriously to stay away from him. It was incredibly weird. There was clearly some bad history between them. Shortly after, I went inside to meet our coach, Jade. She explained the role and introduced me to my co-star. My jaw almost dropped when I realized it was Nathanth guy from the yard. I smiled and offered my hand, but Nathan completely ignored me and focused on his script. I stood there insulted, wondering why he was suddenly acting like I was a stranger. To make matters worse, we immediately started rehearsing the scene on a rotating stage. Since I had never been on one, I lost my balance and fell right into Nathan's arm. He caught me, but as my face burned, his eyes darted toward Luke. The next second, he abruptly let go, leaving me to fall flat and almost kiss the floor. Before I could recover, a girl barged in, demanding to know if everything was ready for her set. Jade scolded her for being late again, calling her Stella, and announced that both Stella and I would be practicing, so she could see who was right for the role. Stella looked at me like I was dirt, scoffing about a complete nobody trying to steal her role. She was incredibly snobby, and she was lucky I didn't want to make a scene on my first day. During our break, I dragged Luke over to a corner by the food table to ask about Stella. He spoke softly, explaining that Stella was incredibly talented because she had been training since she was a little kid. Suddenly, Nathan sliced right between us. With a cold face, he muttered that they should just hand Stella the role and stop wasting everyone's time on amateurs. He then walked away, leaving me absolutely fuming. He was incredibly rude, and I regretted ever thinking he was nice. Over the next few weeks, I finally got a much better grasp of my character. Since the female lead was a gentle, down-to-earth Blackfoot woman, I just had to pretend to be my mom. The only problem was my stage love interest, Nathan, who made everything so difficult by completely refusing to make eye contact with me, though he had no trouble doing so with Stella. Every day, I had lunch with Luke while Nathan and Stella sat giggling in another corner, acting like a power couple. I kept asking myself if they were really in love, but I tried to convince myself that I shouldn't care. After lunch, I ignored Stella's glaring eyes and focused entirely on playing Nathan's lover on stage, pouring my heart into my singing. Stella scoffed and sarcastically complained about my voice, but Jade snapped at her to stop. Jade then revealed she had just informed the director that I was getting the lead role. Stella laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Jade sternly replied that she was serious, adding that Stella's recent performances had been disappointing. Stella turned completely pale. I beamed excitedly at Luke, but he looked deeply concerned and immediately ran out after Stella as she fled. I wondered if he actually had feelings for her. Nathan walked up to me, watching them go, and asked why Luke hadn't just confessed his feelings to Stella. I asked if it was because he and Stella were actually dating, suggesting that was why he was always so half-hearted with me. Nathan looked at me tenderly, whispering that it wasn't like that at all, admitting he just couldn't control himself every time our eyes met. I blushed deeply at his words. He smiled warmly, congratulating me and saying he always knew I deserved the role. My dream felt closer than ever. The next day, I rushed to the theater for our first official rehearsal, acting with everything I had in front of Mr. Killorn and the crew. Suddenly, the double doors slammed open. It was my mom. She marched toward the stage, yelling that she couldn't believe I had lied to her just to perform such foolish antics. Mr. Killorn turned pale and Jade gasped. I begged my mom to let me finish, but she coldly told me that if I wanted to be this way, I was no longer her daughter until I came to my senses. She stormed out and Mr. Killorn quickly called for a break and rushed out after her. I immediately marched over to Luke and demanded to know if he had told my mom the truth. He started stammering, but before he could answer, Mr. Killorn walked back in and stood between us, allowing Luke to slip away. The director admitted he hadn't known I had to lie to my mother to be here. I sadly explained that she had always been incredibly negative about my acting dream. He told me I was doing a great job and suggested that I take him to meet my mom sometime so he could try to explain things to her. Hearing that made me feel so much better. The following day, confidently acting out my scenes, Jade suddenly looked very dissatisfied and criticized my movements as far too rigid. She coldly announced that she was giving the lead role back to Stella because I needed more training. Stella looked shocked and then furious, snapping that she wasn't a toy to be thrown back and forth before storming out. I stood face to face with Jade, demanding to know why she had suddenly changed her mind. Jade looked at me sternly, telling me I wasn't qualified and that I should just go back to my mother before leaving. I couldn't understand what my mother had to do with this, but I knew I couldn't give up. That night, I stayed late at the empty studio to practice, determined to prove myself, until I awkwardly lost my footing and badly sprained my ankle. I gasped in pain, but Nathan appeared out of nowhere and helped me up. Surprised, I asked him why he was still there, and he explained that he had seen me stay behind. He sat me down and gently pressed an ice bag against my swollen ankle. I felt a rush of butterflies, but remembering his cold attitude before, I tried to stand up, only to lose my balance and fall right back into his warm embrace. Nathan softly told me that he had only been acting hot and cold because he didn't want Luke to misunderstand anything. Confused, I told him that Luke and I were just friends and asked what was going on between them. Nathan sighed and explained that Luke had been head over heels for Stella back in acting school and had asked Nathan to set them up. Nathan agreed, but the next day, Stella unexpectedly confessed her feelings for Nathan right in front of Luke. Luke had resented Nathan ever since, thinking it was a cruel joke. I hesitantly asked if he and Stella were really just friends. Nathan assured me they were, explaining that he was just looking out for her through her personal struggle. He then looked at me with a tender smile, whispering that Stella would have to learn to stand on her own now, because he believed he had finally found his own guardian spirit. My heart skipped a beat. We were standing so close that I thought we were about to kiss, but I quickly pulled myself away, nervously saying that I needed to get back to practicing. The final rehearsal was tomorrow, and it was my last chance to get my role back. I arrived at the final rehearsal as a substitute, but since Stella was missing and the director was growing impatient, Jade pushed me onto the stage. Luke looked unhappy about this and played his piano track way too fast. Flustered, I just took a deep breath and let myself spin to his rapid rhythm. During the intermission, I asked Luke what was wrong. He angrily told me to drop the act, claiming he knew Miss Killorn was my dad and that we had forced Stella out of her role. I stood there completely confused. Before I could ask more, I was called back to the stage for a scene with Nathan, right under a massive chandelier. Still puzzled by Luke's words, I couldn't focus. Suddenly, Nathan screamed my name and leaped to push me aside. I hit the floor as the heavy chandelier crashed down right on top of him. Everyone rushed to help, and to my surprise, my mom was suddenly there in the crowd. At the hospital lounge, we anxiously waited for the doctor. Luke apologized for his words, explaining that Jade had told him the director was my dad and that we forced Stella out. Killorn and I turned to my mom in absolute shock. The director asked if I was really his daughter, and Mom sadly confirmed. She told him she would take me back to Montana once Nathan recovered so we wouldn't bother him or Jade again. Mr. Killorn protested, asking why she had never told him. Mom tearfully admitted that Jade had threatened to harm me if she ever spoke up. Luke then realized Jade was behind the accident, as he had seen her whispering to the stage crew earlier. Furious, the director left to investigate immediately. I asked Mom if the play was actually about their past love story, and she burst into tears. Soon, the doctor said we could visit. Luke quickly pulled me into Nathan's room, leaving the adults outside. Luke apologized to Nathan for being a jerk. Nathan smiled and handed him a note, telling him to go find Stella before she left the city to clear her head. When Luke questioned why he should go, Nathan reiterated they were just friends. Luke didn't even wait for him to finish and bolted out. I smiled, wishing them a happy ending. In the end, everyone got their happy ending. Luke and Stella are now together, and my parents finally reunited. Jade vanished once her schemes were exposed. It turned out she had been in love with my dad for years, lying to my mom to split them up back then, and tried to get rid of us when we returned. Dad helped me get a spot at a New York theater academy, but since he misses Mom terribly, he always makes excuses to bring Nathan and me back to Montana. During a family picnic in the beautiful mountains, Dad joked about moving the whole theater studio back here. I turned to Nathan and asked what he thought. He looked into my eyes and softly told me that wherever I was, that was exactly where he would be.